And it all comes down to this. Super Bowl 59, the big game, our final captain, my captain of the season. Austin and I are going to be breaking down how to best set your DFS Showdown slate lineups for this year's Super Bowl, the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Stay tuned. Oh, Captain, my captain, this is Club Fantasy's DFS Showdown slate videos. We're going to be breaking down this year's Super Bowl 59, Kansas City Chiefs versus the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm your host, Joshua Hudson. You can find me at the one Hudsonian, that's the number one. And of course, our DFS expert here at Club Fantasy, he is Austin Amandolia at Austin_FFL. Austin, the big game is finally here. Excited? Because I know I am, but I'm also an Eagles fan, so I got a stake in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, as a neutral fan, I am actually really excited about this. It's cool that we get a rematch from a Super Bowl that was just 2 years ago. And honestly, I feel like we definitely got the best team in the NFC. I think the Eagles squeaked it out over the Lions in terms of best team all around, despite the record this year. And how could you argue that a team without I know. And then how could you argue against Patrick Mahomes being the best in the AFC? So it's going to be a great matchup. It was a fun It was a fun game 2 years ago too. So I'm really excited to see this one
back and forth, and a phantom holding call ends the game. But it is what it is. Whatever. Maybe the Eagles can get revenge for James Bradbury.
Not counting on it.
Yeah, it is what it is. Anyway, all right. Friendly reminder, you can play this DFS slate against us, Austin. Tell the good people how they can do just that.
Yes, we have a league on DraftKings. You can join it by following the link in the show description. We will have a $2 contest for this game. There's only one game, so there's only one contest. I'm going to make it a little bit larger just in case some new people creep in for the Super Bowl weekend. So make sure you come fill it up. It's still a relatively small contest, which makes it easier to win. Good place to practice some of the things that we talk about in these shows.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've won like 9 of these contests throughout the playoffs this year, so I'm feeling pretty good about myself. So
learner,
let's see if I can take down another one this week. All right, let's get into our first segment here. It's going to be Captain Chalk. These are the chalky captains that everybody is likely to pick because they are just that damn good. And you know what? It's hard to argue with Saquon Barkley. The man is 30 rushing yards shy of setting the all-time NFL record for rushing yards in a single season, regular and postseason included. But Austin, I'm sure you got more reasons why Saquon is the chalky captain.
Yeah. No, that's the reason. That's why he's the chalky captain. Thing I want to talk about is whether or not he's good chalk to take. And I do think he is good chalk in this game. If for no other reason than that Kansas City has allowed an average of 22 points per game to the running back position since week 14. That's inclusive of the playoffs. That is inclusive of that week 18 game against the Denver Broncos. So they are giving it up against running backs, and Saquon Barkley is going to be really the only running back getting meaningful touches for Philadelphia. They don't run a committee. Kenneth Gainwell doesn't really get a ton of targets or catches, nor does Will Shipley. Every now and then somebody will pop in for Saquon Barkley. Like maybe if he pulls up tight, that'll happen. Like that happened a little bit in the championship game, but like he scored 2 touchdowns anyway, so like it didn't really matter. So I do think it's chalk worth taking, especially because the over under, even though it's at 48.5, which is pretty high, I could see this game hitting the under. We've talked about this before with these two teams, but their defenses are pretty tough, and they are both teams that like to kind of play ball control. Now, Philadelphia can get those explosives, which If they hit that, that's going to make this game a little bit interesting. But Kansas City definitely at least plays slow, which lends itself to this game hitting the under, or there just being less touches overall, which means having a running back in the captain spot is even all that more viable. So all around, I love Saquon Barkley in the captain spot. In a large field contest, I'm probably not doing it because if you're playing like the Million Maker this week, there's just no leverage to be had there, and it's going to be really hard otherwise. Like I would mix and match my lineups and not just do Saquon Barkley in the captain spot in those larger fields.
Yeah, with Saquon, everybody seems to be leaning on the fact that the Chiefs have not allowed a 100-yard rusher. I think it's since like 2020 or something like that, since Steve Spagnuolo first became the defensive coordinator with Andy Reid there. And, you know, you look at this playoff so far this year, Kansas City gave up 4.9 rushing yards per carry to Joe Mixon, 6.3 to James Cook. Like they've given up yards, and it's largely been these guys haven't crossed that 100-yard threshold because their teams just ultimately abandoned the run. Well, the one stat that I found that I think really lends itself to Barkley and really this Eagles offense as a whole, while the Chiefs have been largely good over the season, they were the second best run defense in the NFL overall. They've struggled against inside zone runs. They allow 4.3 yards per carry, which is 21st in the league. Philly runs inside zone the fourth most percent in the league at 30%. This is where Saquon Barkley dominates and where he gets a lot of his big plays from. So he could very easily cross this threshold and top that 22 fantasy points per game that you spoke about with Kansas City allowing so far through, what was it, since week 14 and inclusive of the playoffs? Yeah. So there you go. Chalk for a reason, guys. But let's flip the script a little bit. Let's talk about the Mutineers, the Contrarian Captains that offer some variety and upside in these larger tournaments. Now, Austin, you spoke about why you maybe want to get different here against Barkley. So let's go on to the Kansas City Chiefs side. Travis Kelce, we know what he's capable of. He has a long history of being arguably the best tight end in NFL history. You know what? Showed up 2 weeks ago in the playoffs, and Philly has kind of struggled against tight ends without Nakobe Dean in the lineup.
Yes, that is true. Philly has struggled against tight ends. And also Travis Kelce, when the last time we saw him come off of an extra week of rest, he freaking popped off against the Houston Texans, catching for at least 100 receiving yards, caught a touchdown in that game. They're going to have a similar setup this week where they're going to be able to really game plan to get Travis Kelce involved. He was a little bit less involved against the Buffalo Bills from a pass catching perspective. He played other roles that were really important for the team. But for this game, I do think that he has a prominent role in it. And I think it's worth getting exposure to him in the captain spot. And there's a lot of guys we're not going to talk about that is like worth building captain lineups around as the captain, just because if you're playing this and you're doing like a 20 max or a 150 max, like you're going to need to get different and different throughout your lineup. So like Travis Kelce is one of them, but like Jalen Hurts is a great captain option. Patrick Mahomes is a great captain option. There's a lot of different ways you can go. I just like Travis Kelce because I think he's probably going to be like the fourth most rostered captain on the slate behind Barkley, Hurts, and Mahomes. And so it's going to be easier to get leverage on the field in those large field tournaments with Kelce in your lineup.
Yeah, tell that to all the Swifties out there that are setting their DFS lineups. You bet your ass Travis Kelce is going to be their captain.
Yeah.
Let's stay on the Chiefs side. Xavier Worthy has been a very popular name in prop betting. And with how talented and really how well the Philly secondary has executed this season, I worry a little bit that people are going a little too high on Xavier Worthy. So why do you like him as a contrarian captain choice this week?
I like him because I still don't think people really associate him having a ceiling performance, like a true ceiling that we think of with like 30, 40-point games. And so I think people won't play him in the captain spot. And so it feels like, as I was thinking about the players that are likely to have the lowest rostership in the captain spot, but the highest upside, Xavier Worthy kind of jumped off the table to me because he's been very heavily utilized down the stretch. Since about week 15, he's hit double-digit fantasy points on DraftKings multiple occasions. He was very involved last week. We haven't seen him hit a multiple touchdown game, but he's utilized in such a way that it is very viable that he could end up scoring 2 touchdowns in this game. And if he does that and catches 6 catches for 100 yards, has one of those types of performances, he's easily going to be one of, if not the most highly scoring players on the slate. And I would not be surprised to see him ending up at 5 to 10% rostership in the captain spot, and getting the highest scoring player at that rostership for the captain spot is going to give you a ton of leverage. So this is particularly a large field play for me. Like Travis Kelce, I think is great in small fields because he's going to be pretty secure. Saquon Barkley, also great in small fields because he's going to be very secure. In large fields, I want to go for somebody like Xavier Worthy, who kind of can jump off the page in that way.
I mean, it makes sense from that perspective. I just think when you're going against Cooper DeJean, who's been lights out in the slot, where Xavier Worthy runs about 57% of his routes, I believe. And then on the 43% when he's outside, likely to see Quinyon Mitchell, both of these guys up for defensive player of the or defensive rookie of the year this season. And both of them have, I don't want to say equal speed to Xavier Worthy, but they can run with him because they're both quick. So they use them a lot in the screen game, obviously. I believe it's 11 of 19 in the last game, or the playoffs or something like that. The screens that they've run, that's who they've targeted with Xavier Worthy. So they're going to rely very heavily on Worthy's yards after catch ability, something that the Eagles have limited very much this season. So very interesting take. All right. Next segment here is the first mate, because every captain needs a reliable crew. These are going to be the standouts that maximize your lineups. If you're talking about kind of alternate captain choices like Xavier Worthy, Dallas Goedert is somebody that I really like as an alternate captain, because Kansas City straight up sucks against the tight end position this year.
Yeah, and I mean, they've been a little bit better down the stretch. So since week 14, they have allowed 12 points per game to the tight end position. That's compared to just under 11 points per game to Philadelphia. So pretty evenly matched from a fantasy production perspective. But I do think that this is an area that Philadelphia can attack Kansas City, because I do think Kansas City also has decent cornerbacks that can. They're not going to stop AJ Brown, but they'll give him and Devontae Smith some trouble, and I think that'll open up some things for Dallas Goedert. So I like having him in any of my lineups because I could see him having one of those like 6-7 catch games, and almost regardless of what he does yardage production wise, or if he falls into the end zone, if he's getting 6 or 7 catches, he's going to be popping up in a lot of those high scoring lineups just because of his price point. He's around the $5K range, and so it really helps you get some salary savings, but also get a high upside player that's likely to be utilized. So it's really just about the usage for Goddard. And if you're playing multiple lineups, like you might play some where you have 5 Kansas City Chiefs players and 1 Philly player, or you might flip the script and do it the other way. But you have to have somebody from each team. And I think if there's anybody that you're going to have from the Philadelphia side that is cheap, I'm going with Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, 100%. Dallas Goedert actually leads the Philadelphia Eagles in receptions over the playoffs this season, and is tied for the team lead with 18 targets. So he's been very heavily utilized this postseason, and I fully expect that to take place here in the Super Bowl as well. Your next first mate here. Yeah, I mean, we don't really like Harrison Butker here at Club Fantasy, but I guess if you're going to talk about a kicker, look, I get it, because Jake Elliott on the flip side has been fucking terrible this year. So if this game comes down to field goals, I guess it makes sense to throw Harrison Butker in your lineup.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you like having players in your lineups that you enjoy rooting for, maybe don't do this. But definitely from a fantasy perspective, it's really just whoever the kicker on the Kansas City side is going to be, I think, or was going to be, is the person to have, because we've talked about before with Kansas City, they're weirdly not this like super aggressive go for it every time on 4th down team. And so they get stopped pretty close to the red zone. Like they usually are able to move the ball down the field and then get stopped. And then, well, they kick field goal. It's like if it's 4th and 3, even if it's at the 10-yard line, there's a good chance they kick a field goal. If it's sometimes, even if it's like 4th and 1, I feel like I'm not convinced that they're going to go for it. And I feel nervous when Kansas City goes for it on like 4th and 1 because I'm like, I don't think y'all have I always feel like they don't have the plays for it, and then somehow they do something weird and quirky and it works out. All that to say, Kansas City is a good team to bet on kickers because they do kick a decent amount of field goals.
That makes sense. Next segments are deck scrubbers. These are going to be the cheaper punt plays that can make a lineup based on one play and limited opportunity. Let's talk defenses, because the last time these two teams played in the Super Bowl, they just combined for 73 points. And neither of these offenses turned the football over much. So let's talk about why you're interested here in the Kansas City Chiefs defense.
Yeah, wasn't one of those touchdowns by Kansas City in that Super Bowl a defensive touchdown? So that's actually why is Kansas City has got this interesting trend where they tend to perform really well on defense and particularly on special teams in some of these big games. So 2 years ago against Philadelphia, they had that return fumble recovery for a touchdown. Last year, they returned a punt for a touchdown. And there have been moments multiple times during the playoffs where I've been like, dang, Kansas City is really firing on all cylinders on all 3 phases of the game, on special teams as well. So it's all that to say, like, don't just shy away from them because we've seen these two teams shoot out recently in the Super Bowl. I can see a game where Kansas City is able to force a turnover, is able to do something big on special teams, and it still be close because we've seen Patrick Mahomes turn the ball over. We've seen Travis Kelce fumble the ball. Other players, I'm sure Xavier Worthy, I would not be shocked to see him give up a fumble in this game, frankly. And so, like, it could still be back and forth and tight, but Kansas City's defense do a couple of like splash plays that help them to score well. I'm not going overboard with it. I'm doing it here and there, and they're really cheap, and so it's intriguing to me. But I do think because they're a really good, well-rounded team, especially on special teams, that it's worth having them in your player pool consideration for this game.
If you're considering a defense, I'll also give you the flip side to that, because Philly's turnover margin this year is light years ahead of Kansas City's. Just throwing that out there. Just throwing that out there. But I don't disagree with you. They do show up in the big moments, and their special teams is much better than Philly's is. Let's stay with the Kansas City Chiefs side. Noah Gray, this team runs a lot of 12 personnel. Why do you like him as a cheap play?
Because they run a lot of 12 personnel, and because if it's not going to be Travis Kelce getting it at tight end, it's going to be Noah Gray. And I do think like this is the type of game too where, you know, you've had 2 weeks to game plan. Andy Reid always has some kind of shenanigans cooked up in these games. It's the type of deal where Noah Gray could pop for a touchdown just randomly. And we saw him have some ceiling games during the season. It's also because there's not a ton of good cheap plays in this game. Normally, Kansas City is great for cheap punt plays because there's like all these random receivers that could get it. But I got to be honest, I'm not feeling convinced by Juju Smith-Schuster's performance against the Buffalo Bills. So I'm going to look at Noah Gray. There's no Joey Fortson to pop in for a touchdown randomly, so I can't do that. He's on IR. I just don't like the cheap options, but Noah Gray is one of the safest bets to have an upside play. There are some other people that like it's worth taking the shot with, like Samaje Perine is cheap enough. We've seen him have explosive screen plays before, dump off passes against the Chiefs, ironically enough. So like he has that ability for a pop play, but for the most part, there's not a bunch of cheap options. So I'm really focusing on getting different with how I'm constructing my lineup at the captain spot, and then trying to get a little bit creative with my cheap pump plays. And I think Noah Gray will be low rostered enough that he'll help you get different and have some upside.
Just curious, do you know off the top of your head how much DeAndre Hopkins is on Showdowns?
Yeah, I do know that he is cheaper than Jake Elliott. I think he was at like $4,800. I thought about him for this part of the show as well because he is the type of player. Did I remember accurately? Oh no, he's $4,400. Jake Elliott is $4,800. The Eagles defense is 4,200, so he's smack dab between a kicker and a defense, which is
so he's probably more along the first mate side of things. But I wanted to point out DeAndre Hopkins, not necessarily because he's been so highly utilized, like Juju Smith-Schuster is running more routes than he is, but something that DeAndre Hopkins has done well really throughout his whole career, but especially this season, has been zone coverage. And the Eagles run a ton of zone coverage. So seeing as how this is, 32-year-old DeAndre Hopkins' first time in the Super Bowl, and Andy Reid being the player's coach that he is, I could see DeAndre Hopkins showing up big in this game and really paying off at a pretty reasonable price. So just wanted to toss that out. So, but one more time, you can play this DraftKings Showdown slate against us here at Club Fantasy. Just hit the link in the description of the video that you're watching on YouTube or listening to on your favorite podcast network. Come on in. It's a $2 contest. And you know what? Try to take our money. Use our advice against us, because some people do and sometimes they don't. But, that's what makes it fun. All right, our last category, my favorite, the Kraken. These are the lineup traps that sink the ship. Let's stay on the Kansas City Chiefs side. Isaiah Pacheco, since coming back from injury, has not taken back that starting job. What on earth is going on?
There you go. That's the analysis. I mean, yeah, I have been very surprised to see him not take this over. I mean, maybe he's still just like getting back up to speed, but I don't know. It seems like they wouldn't have activated him if he like wasn't ready to go in my mind. But it just, I mean, I guess like also he feels like the type of player, he doesn't like seem to have really great vision. He just seems to run really hard. And so if he's not like making the right cuts, and he's like taking a second to readjust to like, oh, how do I make the right cuts all the time? Maybe that's what's happening. And they're like, you know what, Kareem Hunt, he's just on a roll and able to get us 3 to 4 yards every time. So we're going to keep doing that. But it's essentially, there's just no upside here. And Pacheco is still expensive enough that it's like, do I really want to pay that much for a guy that's like going to get like 5 to 8 touches and not like maybe get 20 yards? Like, I don't think he's going to be the red zone back. He's not going to get, if they're at the 2-yard line, it's going to be Kareem Hunt or Patrick Mahomes doing a little weird trick play or scrambling out himself. So I don't think there's any upside here, and I'll be avoiding him and looking elsewhere.
No, I think that's smart. I mean, both Pacheco and Hunt, I believe, are averaging less than 4 yards per carry. Pacheco's usage through the playoffs, I think, is less than 30%. Like, they're leaning on Kareem Hunt and sort of that veteran leadership, which I think is really interesting, because Pacheco has been really good for this team in the playoffs over the last 2 years during their back-to-back Super Bowl appearances. So going into year 3 of this, I don't know. Pacheco kind of tried and true. Maybe we see a game flip script, but yeah, who knows? Next one here. I have no explanation. Literally none, because there's no ungodly reason why Devonta Smith should be a lineup trap here, Austin. So I'm going to need you to get on your soapbox and explain yourself.
Well, first off, players with hamstring injuries make me nervous in general. That's a quote from Josh Hudson.
Look, I get it, but you realize like he barely has a hamstring, right? Like he's a beanball. It may not matter.
Yeah, honestly, it's because like it's really to say like I don't want to go overweight on him is really the thing here. It's not that you shouldn't play him, it's that I don't want to go overweight. It's weird to me that in a game where Philadelphia scores 55 points, Devontae Smith gets 4 catches. And like I get it, they have Saquon Barkley. But like it doesn't
7 rushing touchdowns.
It doesn't bode well for the confidence. It doesn't give me confidence in Devonta Smith. What if they have 4 rushing touchdowns again in this game? That's part of the thing, is like this Philadelphia Eagles team, they're very run heavy, both because of Jalen Hurts' ability, the advantage of the tush push, and Saquon Barkley being incredible and can pop off a 60-yard rushing touchdown at any time. I don't want to be overweight on the passing game in general, especially on Devonta Smith, because I think it's going to lean AJ Brown. He's still the number 1. He's been getting more of the targets. I will play him, and I will play him in my captain spot, though, because I do know that Devonta Smith has the upside. He has some 30-point performances this year, oddly enough, when Kenny Pickett was under center, but whatever. also not voting confidence for this situation, but I do still like him as a player. It's all to say, like, if you're like, oh, Devontae Smith is going to be the X factor, and so I'm going to play him at like 80% of my lineups, I'm not doing that. I'm going to keep him at like a hot 20% of my lineups just to keep my expectations low.
No, it makes sense. For the record, Devonta Smith averages 9 targets per game in his career against Kansas City, averages over 100 yards, but has not scored a touchdown against the Kansas City Chiefs in his career. He will see a lot of good matchups. Trent McDuffie, their all-pro corner for the Chiefs, likely to be playing a lot against A.J. Brown. So that's going to give Devonta Smith plenty of opportunities against lesser corners. And there's going to be ways that, you know, Jalen Hurts and this Eagles offense can exploit the defense with Devonta Smith. But again, that's really not what their offense has been this year. So it's going to be really interesting to see whether or not Kellen Moore has taken enough time away from like trying to assemble a coaching staff to take over the Saints and actually put together a decent game plan. So with that, this has been our final O Captain, My Captain of the 2024 NFL season. You can follow Austin at Austin_FFL, myself at the one Hudsonian. That's the number 1. And of course, check out everything that Club Fantasy has to offer. Like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us across the socials at Club Fantasy FFL, the URL, clubfantasyffl.com. Until next year, folks, this has been O Captain, My Captain.